Every dollar they print makes them richer and makes you poorer. That is not a conspiracy theory. That is monetary policy. Quantitative easing inflates asset prices before it raises consumer prices. The Federal Reserve has pumped over $9 trillion into the financial system since 2008. And where did that money go? Not into your paycheck, not into your savings account. It went straight into stocks, bonds, and real estate, the assets owned overwhelmingly by the top 1%. Meanwhile, your grocery bill doubled, your rent tripled, and they told you it was temporary. Printed money for them. Today, we are going to follow every single dollar from the printing press to the penthouse. We are going to expose who benefits, who pays, and why the system was designed this way from the very beginning. As the economist John Kenneth Galbraith once warned, the process by which banks create money is so simple that the mind is repelled. By the end of this video, you will never look at your money the same way again. The money machine. Most people think the government prints money. They don't. The Federal Reserve does. And the Federal Reserve is not a government agency. It is a private banking cartel established in 1913 by the very bankers who profit from its existence. When the Fed engages in quantitative easing, it does not print physical cash and hand it to citizens. It creates digital dollars out of thin air and uses them to buy financial assets from banks and large institutions. The money never reaches Main Street. It stays on Wall Street. Think about that. The Fed created $4.5 trillion between 2008 and 2014. Another $5 trillion between 2020 and 2022. Almost $10 trillion conjured into existence. And the first people to touch that money were J.P. Morgan, Goldman Sachs, BlackRock, and the hedge funds that manage wealth for billionaires. New money enters the economy at the top and trickles down as inflation. This is called the Cantillon effect, named after an 18th century economist who understood that whoever receives new money first benefits the most. Everyone else pays the price. As the great economist Milton Friedman put it, inflation is always and everywhere a monetary phenomenon. But what exactly happens when all that money floods the financial system? The answer will make your blood boil. Asset inflation. Here is what they never explain on the evening news. When the Fed pumps trillions into the system, that money does not evenly distribute across the economy. It concentrates in financial assets first. Stocks surge. Real estate skyrockets. Bond prices climb. And who owns these assets? The wealthy. The top 10% of Americans own 89% of all stocks. The top 1% owns more real estate than the entire bottom 50% combined. So when the Fed prints money and asset prices soar, the rich get dramatically richer, while you wonder why you cannot afford a house anymore. Assets rise, wages don't. Between 2020 and 2021, American billionaires increased their collective wealth by $2 trillion. During the same period, 40% of Americans could not cover a $400 emergency expense. This is not a coincidence. This is the direct, mathematical consequence of monetary policy. The Fed calls it stimulating the economy. If this pattern is starting to disturb you, hit like and subscribe to keep exposing what they hide, because what comes next connects all the dots. The question nobody asks is simple. If the money goes to the top first, when does it reach you? And the answer is devastating. The Cantillon trap. Richard Cantillon figured this out in the 1730, and the elites have been hoping you never learn his name. The Cantillon effect describes a brutal economic truth. When new money enters an economy, it does not raise all prices simultaneously. It raises prices wherever it lands first. The first receivers of new money gain purchasing power at everyone else's expense. Imagine a swimming pool. The Fed turns on a fire hose at one end. The people standing at that end, the banks, the hedge funds, the connected corporations, they get soaked in liquidity. They buy assets before prices adjust. By the time the water reaches the shallow end where you are standing, everything already costs more. Your dollars buy less. Your wages are nominally the same, but functionally smaller. You did not get poorer because you made bad decisions. You got poorer because someone else received the new money before you did. As the French philosopher Voltaire observed centuries ago, paper money eventually returns to its intrinsic value, zero. And this brings us to the most insidious part of the scheme. Because the inflation you feel at the grocery store is not an accident. It is the exhaust fume of a wealth transfer machine. Your grocery tax. Let us talk about what inflation actually means for your daily life. In 2020, a dozen eggs cost $1.46 on average. By 2023, that same dozen cost $4.82. Triple. Ground beef went from $4 to $6. A loaf of bread from $2.50 to nearly $4. Your monthly grocery bill went from around $400 to over $600. That is $2,400 extra dollars a year just on food. 1. Eggs up 230% since 2020. 2. Rent up 25% nationwide. 3. Used cars up 40% in 2 years. 4. Real wages down 3%, adjusted. Now here is the cruel irony. The Federal Reserve will tell you with a straight face that inflation is running at 3 to 4%. They use something called the Consumer Price Index, which conveniently excludes the things that matter most to ordinary people. Housing. They use a fake metric called owner's equivalent rent. Food and energy. They strip those out for their core inflation number. Hidden real cost exposed. As the economist Thomas Sowell warned, inflation is a way to take people's wealth from them without having to openly raise taxes. But the question nobody in Washington wants to answer is this. If they knew printing money would cause this, why did they do it anyway? Who benefits? Follow the money. Always follow the money. When the Fed printed trillions during the pandemic, Congress passed stimulus checks of $1,200 per person. Sounds generous until you do the math. The government distributed approximately $800 billion in direct stimulus, while the Fed created over $5 trillion in new money. Where did the other $4.2 trillion go? Into asset purchases, corporate bond buying programs, bank reserve injections. In other words, directly into the pockets of the financial elite. For every dollar you received, they received 5,000. JP Morgan Chase posted record profits in 2021. Goldman Sachs had its most profitable year in history. BlackRock's assets under management surged past $10 trillion, making it larger than the GDP of every country except the United States and China. These institutions did not create value during the pandemic. They did not invent anything. They did not build anything. They simply stood closest to the money printer. And here is what makes it even worse. Many of the same people making these decisions move between the Federal Reserve, the Treasury Department, and Wall Street through a revolving door that would make your head spin. But this is not just an American problem. This pattern repeats everywhere. And what comes next proves it. Global pattern. This is not just the Fed. Every major central bank on the planet is running the same playbook. The European Central Bank printed over 5 trillion euros in quantitative easing. The Bank of Japan has been printing money for over 20 years and now owns more than half of all Japanese government bonds. The Bank of England, the Swiss National Bank, the People's Bank of China. Every bank, same game. All of them are transferring wealth from savers to asset holders, from the middle class to the financial class, from the future to the present. As the legendary investor Ray Dalio documented, throughout history, when the gap between the rich and the poor gets very large, there is a revolution. The total global debt now exceeds $307 trillion. That is 300% of global GDP. This debt can never be repaid. It can only be inflated away. And inflating it away means destroying the purchasing power of every person who earns a wage, saves in a bank account, or lives on a fixed income. The entire global monetary system is designed to transfer wealth upward. And if you think this system evolved by accident, let me introduce you to the architects. Because the history of how we got here is darker than you imagine. 1971, on August 15th, 1971, President Richard Nixon went on television and changed the world forever. He severed the link between the US dollar and gold, decoupled. Before that date, every dollar was backed by a fixed amount of gold stored in Fort Knox. The government could not print money without having the gold to back it. This was the discipline that kept inflation in check for generations. Nixon removed that discipline in what he called a temporary measure. That was over 50 years ago. The temporary measure that became permanent theft. Since 1971, the dollar has lost over 87% of its purchasing power. A house that cost $25,000 in 1971 now costs $400,000. A car that cost $3,000 costs $40,000. A college education that cost $1,000 costs $50,000. None of this is natural economic growth. This is the direct consequence of a currency untethered from any physical constraint. As the economist Ludwig von Mises predicted decades before Nixon acted, there is no means of avoiding the final collapse of a boom brought about by credit expansion. Nixon freed the government to print without limits, and every administration since, Republican and Democrat alike, has used that freedom to enrich the connected few. But the real question is how they convinced you this was normal. The narrative. They manufactured your consent to be robbed. Every mainstream financial outlet repeats the same phrases like a script. Quantitative easing is necessary to support the economy. Low interest rates help everyday Americans. Inflation is transitory. These are not explanations. They are cover stories. The financial media is owned by the same corporations that benefit from money printing. CNBC is owned by Comcast. Bloomberg is owned by a billionaire. The Wall Street Journal is owned by News Corp. Fox Business, CNN Business, all of them funded by the advertising dollars of the banks and financial institutions that profit from the very policies they report on. Controlled media, controlled narrative. Have you ever noticed that no major financial network has ever seriously questioned the existence of the Federal Reserve itself? Never questioned why a private institution controls the money supply of the most powerful nation on earth. They will never expose the system that pays their bills. As the great Noam Chomsky explained, the smart way to keep people passive is to strictly limit the spectrum of acceptable opinion. They give you the illusion of debate while the fundamental questions remain permanently off the table. But there is something they fear more than any investigation, and it has everything to do with what is happening right now. The debt spiral. The United States national debt just crossed $34 trillion. Let me help you understand that number. If you spent $1 every second, it would take you over 1 million years to spend $34 trillion. Unsustainable. The interest alone on this debt now exceeds $1 trillion per year. That is more than the entire defense budget, more than Medicare, more than every other discretionary spending category combined. And here is the trap. The government cannot stop printing money because it needs new money to pay the interest on the old money. 1. Print money to fund deficit spending. 2. Debt grows, requiring more interest payments. 3. Print more money to pay the interest. 4. Currency loses, value repeat cycle. This is a debt spiral. It is the same pattern that destroyed Weimar Germany, Zimbabwe, Venezuela, and the Roman Empire. Every single empire in history that debased its currency eventually collapsed. Every single one. As the philosopher George Santayana famously said, those who cannot remember the past are condemned to repeat it. The Romans clipped their coins. We print digits on a screen. The mechanism changed. The result never does. And the final piece of this puzzle is what they are building to replace it. Digital control. Central bank digital currencies. CBDC. Remember that name because it will define the next chapter of this story. Over 130 countries, representing 98% of global GDP, are now exploring digital currencies. China already launched the digital yuan. The European Central Bank is developing the digital euro. The Federal Reserve is studying a digital dollar. They tell you it is about efficiency, about modernization, about fighting crime. But here is what a CBDC actually means. Every transaction you make can be tracked in real time. Your money can be programmed to expire if you do not spend it fast enough. Your accounts can be frozen instantly without a court order. Track, control, freeze, expire. Imagine a world where the government decides you bought too much gasoline this month, and your digital wallet simply stops working at the pump. Where your social media post criticizing a policy results in your savings being restricted. They want to replace the money printer with a control panel. This is not science fiction. This is actively being built right now with your tax dollars. As the former Congressman Ron Paul warned for decades, it is no coincidence that the century of total war coincided with the century of central banking. The printing press was bad enough. What comes next could be the end of financial freedom as we know it. So let us connect every dot. In 1971, they removed the gold standard and gave themselves unlimited printing power. They used that power to create trillions of dollars that flowed directly to banks and financial institutions. Those institutions bought assets, driving up prices and making the wealthy exponentially richer. The leftover inflation trickled down to you in the form of higher groceries, higher rent, and a shrinking paycheck. They printed money for themselves and inflation for you. The media told you it was normal. The economists told you it was necessary. The politicians told you it was temporary. And now they are building a digital currency system that will give them even more control over every dollar you earn and spend. Wake up, see clearly. But here is what they do not want you to know. The system only works as long as you do not understand it. The moment enough people see the pattern, the moment enough people follow the money, the moment enough people refuse to accept the narrative, the game changes. Knowledge is the one asset they cannot inflate away. As the philosopher Mitchell Foucault once said, knowledge is not for knowing, knowledge is for cutting. Cut through the lies. Educate yourself. Protect your purchasing power. Demand accountability from the institutions that control your money. If you made it this far, comment Cantillon effect to prove you understand how the system really works. Every government lies. The question is, what are they lying about? The truth is out there. You just have to follow the money. Like and subscribe to keep exposing what they don't want you to see.